Hi, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to another In Conversation. My guest here on In Conversation tonight is someone who, just as I did myself, arrived at a point in his life where he decided to leave another place, a place he grew up in, and begin a new life in another country, another language, another culture, to become expatriate. And among the expats that I've met over the years, living here in France, which is quite a lot, I've noticed that broadly speaking, we fall into two groups. There are those of us who are motivated primarily by the need or desire to leave somewhere, to get away, to start afresh. And there are those that, for whatever reason, come like moths to a light towards their vision of a particular new destination. In my case, I came to live in France mainly as a result of spending my formative years watching an awful lot of French movies in the United Kingdom, so much so that after a while, watching just wasn't enough. I had to be in those movies, or at least in the country where they were being made. My guest tonight had a rather different motivation for taking that one-way ticket. And so to tell us about that and the life he has built here in France, it's my pleasure to introduce to you the writer and expatriate, Jeremy Mercer. Jeremy, welcome to In Conversation, or maybe I should say, bonsoir et bienvenue.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a true delight to be with you this evening.
Well, it's great to have you too. Thank you, Jeremy. Off the bat, I just described you as a writer. Is that a description you would use about yourself? Because you're also a journalist and a lecturer and an essayist and a translator.
Yes, absolutely. I wouldn't call myself a writer now, simply because I've gained so much respect for the great writers. As a younger man, I probably would have flouted it, if you would. But honestly, now I just work with words. And I love words, and I love everything from crossword puzzles to translation to writing essays to writing nonfiction. It's a joy. So I work with words.
We'll come to some of that a little later on. But you came to France in 1999, is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
And as I intimated in my introduction, you had a pretty sound reason to get away from your homeland of Canada. So just tell us what job you were doing in Canada and why did you suddenly have to leave the country?
Yeah, so I studied journalism, and I was hired by a local newspaper in Ottawa, which is the capital of Canada, of course. And a lot of young reporters get put on the crime beat because it's got unforgiving hours. And also you have to be not too sensitive, right? You're dealing with a lot of death and tragedy. And so I threw myself into it, and it quickly became a pretty unhealthy lifestyle. You're always with defense lawyers, police officers, really cynical people. Lots of drinking, lots of moral gray areas. And at one point, I was writing books about criminals, and I was working with them quite closely to the point where I counted them as my friends. And at one point, I published a book where I betrayed a confidence too many. It's a stupid story, but someone gave me these great details of how they robbed an IKEA. Fantastic. From A to Z, how it was done. And so I covered his identity in the chapter, but I thanked him in the preface.
Oh, no.
Who would have thought? Who would have thought? And so he called me, threatened me. Then he broke into my apartment and smashed it up a bit. And that's when I decided, you know what? I'm not particularly happy with my lifestyle, and I need to get out. Yeah, and that's when I moved to Paris.
But you say he threatened. I mean, were you literally scared for your life?
At that time, I was, and then very much so. As I said, he broke into my apartment. He ran with a very tough, like he'd done prison at that point. And the reason he was so mad at me, to be truth, is we had a long relationship, about 5-6 years, source and journalist. He'd just been accepted to work with the Hells Angels. And the condition of his work was that he stopped talking to journalists, right? And so the fact, I mean, it's a beautiful story because my life was wonderful. I moved to France and have this happy life. The Hells Angels were so upset with him for having talked to me again that he had to leave Ottawa too. and he reinvented himself in Toronto and has an exceptional life. He's very, very rich because he sells extended warranties at a technology store, and he's so damn mean and tough and scary. Everybody says yes. So he became the #1 extended warranty seller in Toronto. So it all turned out really well, but he was quite worried about his safety, and he says he was just trying to scare me, and I don't think he would have killed me, but he did say he was expected to hurt me. So
okay. So how did your friends and family react when presumably you had to leave pretty fast?
I left within 7 days. Yeah.
7 days. Oh my God.
It was pretty exciting. It was very exciting. I'm looking back on it. My girlfriend was quite upset, but she did help me clean up my apartment. I don't think I got the security deposit back. And it was.
Did anybody think you were maybe overreacting?
Now I do. Now, looking back, especially since we've rekindled a very delicate friendship. I don't know, overreacting. He's told me that he would have broken one of my legs. Now, is he exaggerating? Probably, but the break and entry was enough to scare me. But what really, obviously, like there's a much deeper malaise in the life, right? If you find yourself in these situations, it's not, it's not that one threat. It's like you realize, wait a second, perhaps I'm not living life in my best way, if you will. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if if an analyst would maybe call leaving his name in the preface as a sort of an act manqué, as almost a sort of subconscious, deliberate act in order to force yourself into a situation where you had to change your life radically and very quickly.
Honestly, I love your intellectual metaphor. My metaphor is a bit more Canadian. So in Canada, you get these big bears who get in fights, and they get these huge sacks of pus that grow in their backs. So they hurl themselves against trees to burst open the pus sacks, and it's these violent, horrible acts, and they don't know why they're doing it, but they have to release that big ball of pus. So, yeah, grizzly bears are act manqué, potato, potato, tomato, tomato.
And why France? I understand someone was threatening to break your legs. You had to get out of the country. But why France? What was
this was actually a really logical decision. I'd been hired out of my university prior to completing my degree, and the one credit I was missing from a degree was a French credit. So I called my thesis advisor and said, "Well, what if I took a French class in France?" And she said yes, and so that's where I went.
And so you arrived in Paris. Did you have it? Was it? Apart from getting your credit, was there a game plan? And did you have money to support yourself?
The game plan was to become a world famous novelist. Very, very reasonable game plan, of course. Nobody's ever thought of it either. No one's ever thought of moving to Paris to write a book. That's very original. But no game plan and no money. Very little, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 Canadian dollars at the time, which didn't last much beyond a month. And no plan.
And then
don't you wish we could all be that age again where you could fling yourself into the universe with no plan and just think it's going to be okay?
Well, actually, I'm still doing it. It's just I don't swim so well as I used to. That's the only problem. But
bravo, hats off to you. Yeah.
But Jeremy, one grey Sunday in a Parisian winter, you walked into a bookstore down by the River Seine, right opposite Notre Dame. And this wasn't any old bookstore. This bookstore was and still is a legend in Paris and far beyond. And it's called Shakespeare Company. So just tell us what happened. Before we get to you telling me about what it was like in that bookstore, James, we have a little video that was made for Viking Cruises as part of our sort of explaining the places that we go and visit, and this will give you a little taste of what that bookstore was like. Let's have a look at the video.
Tucked away is Shakespeare and Company books.
Hi, Sylvia. Hello.
Long a favourite of book lovers, the shop was started by an American idealist.
Shakespeare Company started in 1919 by a formidable woman called Sylvia Beach. Her bookshop became kind of a centre for American expats like Hemingway, Fitzgerald, and a lot of French writers like Paul Valéry as well.
In 1944, Sylvia closed her store rather than sell books to the Nazis. After the war was over, American George Whitman opened a new store and soon paid tribute to Sylvia using the Shakespeare Company name, and then further honoured her, naming his daughter, who now runs the store, Sylvia Beach Whitman. Today, Shakespeare Company is a literary haven and home to what George called tumbleweeds. The tumbleweeds are aspiring writers who for years have had the chance to work and live in the shop. The store's ground floor is a labyrinth with fascinating titles tucked into every nook and cranny.
The second floor of Shakespeare's books is the library. Here, you're greeted with a quote overhead, which says, "Be not inhospitable to strangers, lest they be angels in disguise." And the next room is perhaps my favorite in the whole shop. In here, we have one of the many beds on which the tumbleweeds sleep. And we also have a piano. I've been here several times when talented young pianists have been performing, and it's been absolutely magical.
If you're looking to explore something a little bit different in Paris, Shakespeare Company is surely the place to see. Viking. Let us share a bit of the real Europe with you.
So that gives you a little flavour of the bookstore. Jeremy, what happened that Sunday, that winter Sunday in Paris, when you crossed the threshold and for the first time and walked in?
Well, it was a really depressing moment because I'd paid up the end of the week at the hotel I was staying at, and I had very little money. And I'd met a young woman just casually, and she'd wanted to go on the Grand Rue, the big Ferris wheel. So we bought those tickets, and that was like my budget for 2 days, and I was so depressed. And I was walking around, and I saw the bookstore, and they're selling books, used books for 10 francs. And I'm like, wait a second, I just spent 25 francs to go on a Ferris wheel for 3 minutes. I could buy 3 books, and that'll entertain me for 2 days. So I picked up my books, I walked in, and the gentleman said, "Oh, you're here to stay with us?" And I had no idea what he was talking about. And I honestly don't know. It's such a miraculous thing to happen because obviously I was open to anything. And if you think of all the bad things that could come your way when you're open to anything and you'll say yes to anything. Mm-hmm. And this wonderful man who'd seen so many people, so many travelers, so many people in need. And for him to make that offer at that time that I could come and live in the bookstore, it was just an exceptional moment of chance. I mean, if you believe in fate, if you believe in God, whatever you may believe in, but it's phenomenal.
You're right time, right place. Huh?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Well, here's the question: what is it like to live in a bookstore?
Well, it's sensational. So just so you can picture it, you didn't really see it in that video because due to fire codes and safety codes, the bookstores had to change quite a bit, and the old bookstore was kind of grandfathered in. There used to be between 7 and 9 beds in the store, depending on the time, just tucked in between bookshelves, upstairs, downstairs. And he would, every year, there'd be 1,000 or 2,000 people staying at the store from one night, 2 nights, a traveler, to some people like my friend Simon the poet, who slept at the bookstore for 6 years. And looking back on it, again, it's a young man's game. I mean, there's obviously no shower. There's a squat Moroccan toilet. There's no cooking facilities. You were always roused very early to open the bookstore. But being young in Paris, you'd be drinking late into the night. So you never had enough sleep. You never had enough to eat, and you'd never showered. But he set this rule that to stay there, you had to read a book a day because he didn't want it to be just, like a youth hostel. He wanted people to be reading, and he saw who was serious about it. And so, I mean, during my 4 months at the bookstore, I read over 150 books.
Whoa.
And, that's the biggest luxury in life, right? Time.
Yeah.
To have that time to be in one place to read or just whatever you want, whatever your passion is, to have the time to do it. And I think despite all the craziness of the situation, what I really remember is the beauty of reading, just being given 6, 7, 8, 10 hours a day to read. And that was your job, as it were.
Yeah. Did you manage to do any writing?
I did. I wrote quite a bit. I wrote quite a bit of crap, to be honest. We opened a little shop where so many tourists came in. So the way we got money is we had an old typewriter and we sold little stories to tourists. And we probably made like 100, 200 francs a day, but that was more than enough we needed. So I was writing lots of little short stories. And then I started writing some essays. And we, like, again, every cliche you want, we started a literary magazine. So I was doing a lot of writing and editing with the literary magazine. And we ran that for 3 years out of the bookstore. So a whole lot of writing at that time. And just, again, to move from journalism, which is a certain type of writing that favors a certain type of style, to suddenly recognize the greatness of writers and how high the bar was and how exigeant, I'm going to use a French word there, but how demanding we have to be with ourselves. Mm-hmm. If we're going to put our work into the arena, if you will, among so many books to read, you really have to care about what you're doing, and that's really the writing I did there, was just trying not to be crap, you know.
Yeah. But you and the bookshop owner, George Whitman, you became quite close. What kind of person was? Because he was a pretty exceptional individual, wasn't he?
So George came over to Paris, much like as you evoked at the beginning, he was getting away from an America he didn't believe in. He's coming to Paris at the same time as Ferlinghetti was there to escape, right? The post-World War II Paris that represented a sort of a new hope. And he came there to escape the systems of America, which he saw as an increasingly capitalistic America. And he had traveled around the world and slept at people's homes. So he came to Paris. He found the original Shakespeare Company, the owner of it, Sylvia Beach. He talked to her. He fell in love with the idea of creating a bookstore. He opened it. And the very day he opened the bookstore, he put a bed in just to welcome friends and travelers as he'd been welcomed. Mm-hmm. And over the decades, he kept adding beds, adding rooms, until by the 1990s and early 2000s, it was this labyrinth, this octopus-like bookstore covering 3 or 4 floors, 6 or 7 rooms, and as I say, between 7 and 9 beds, depending on the time of the year. And he was just so devoted to his philosophy. Many people are ready to live a bohemian lifestyle for 6 months a year, but to welcome strangers into your house year after year, decade after decade, it just shows a little bit crazy, but just how devoted he was to the ideal of community, of sharing, of creating a sort of utopian alternative to the capitalist America. He was a remarkable man.
He had a quote. Well, he came up with this description of the bookstore that you all know, and I'm going to just read out now. He said this: I created this bookstore like a man would write a novel, building each room like a chapter. And I like people to open the door the way they open a book that leads into a magic world in their imaginations. Yeah, that's really a beautiful description of how I think a bookstore should be.
How every bookstore should be, absolutely. And it's beautiful. You see, he has a way with words. I mean, George was a great writer too. He often facilitated the art of others, and his writing was often lost. But he was such a poetic man. Yeah.
But he's a poetic man, but an extremely eccentric man. Before we talk about that, we have a little video which will show this man's, George Whitman's, extraordinary haircutting technique. Let's have a look at this.
But don't cut too much. Don't burn too much. Josh, that's enough.
Enough?
Yes.
Well, you can see, a barber would fool around for 20 minutes. It hardly took more than 20 seconds.
You can almost smell the singed hair. I mean,
Absolutely.
he wasn't doing that just for the camera, was he? I mean, that was something he generally did do, burn his hair off.
Well, it goes far beyond that. And the greatest lesson I learned from him, and sadly a lesson I've chosen to ignore later in my life, is the utter freedom that comes with being frugal. If you can not spend a lot of money, if you can live on $500, $800 a month, the world is yours. You can go to museums every day. You can you can do so many things. So he would, he always was buying secondhand clothes. He was always buying, dried beans and cooking them. He always found ways to do things cheaply. And he said, Jeremy, this is how you're free in life. The second you start incurring debts, the second you have to pay for a lot of things, you're gone. You're going to be a slave to working. And he did that for 40, 45 years. And he built the bookstore because of this scrupulous, frugal way of living. So we kind of laugh at his haircut. Or my favorite memory of him is whenever we went out to restaurants, he'd never pay for alcohol, but he'd fill those little old film containers that well with vodka and dump them in his drinks, and we'd drink them. And it's all sort of funny, eccentric old man, but he was dead right. We are all so burdened and weighed down by making payments and money that if we could just learn to give it up, my God. Yeah, but I see this having betrayed his, I have a mortgage, I have children, I have a car payment, and it crushes me. It crushes me. And I read maybe 20 books a year, whereas I used to read 30 books a month. So
it's like that Bob Dylan line, freedom is having nothing left to lose.
Is that Bob Dylan or Janis Joplin?
I thought it was Dylan, but maybe he stole it from Joplin, or maybe the other way around. I don't know.
Yeah, but, absolutely. But that is one of the greatest lines in. Yeah.
Well, there's a sort of seam of truth that runs through it, I think. But George Whitman used to. I mean, he was known for hiding money all over the place, wasn't he? He would hide it amongst the books. I mean, the people. In fact, I think people would come in looking. Is that right? People looking for money.
There were two sets of thieves that worked at Shakespeare Company. There's the book thieves who'd come in and sell books, steal books, and then sell them to other booksellers, and that drove him mad. And honestly, to be honest, the people who stole books bothered him more than the people who came in and found an envelope of 5,000 francs. He hated book thieves, and in a little ways, there was money all over the store, but he was crazy like a fox because he didn't really care about the money. But so many people came in trying to steal his first edition of Ulysses by James Joyce. Yeah. Everybody tried to steal that thing. And he had tens of thousands of maniacs and artists and desperate people under his roof, and nobody ever got it. So I think that's kind of beautiful too. He probably had $50,000, $100,000 in cash stolen from him over the years, but the only thing he cared about was protecting the book.
Because that would be worth a lot of money, an original edition of.
I remember we checked it when he was there because he'd take it out once in a while and let us touch it, and then we had to leave while he hit it again. At that point, it was worth about 35,000 euros. So it must be worth more now, considering the market. Yeah.
Well, Jeremy, one of those impoverished expatriates, one of those tumbleweeds that came by, was a young poet at the time called Lawrence Ferling, who later changed his name to Lawrence Ferlinghetti and opened an equally famous bookstore in San Francisco that I've been to myself, called City Lights, which
absolutely
was a kind of sister bookstore to Shakespeare Company. Although it was really, when you go to City Lights, it's nothing like Shakespeare Company. It's a lot less chaotic, isn't it? I don't think you can sleep there. I don't think it's any tumbleweeds.
They're very welcome. I was there as well, and Lawrence is so open and sharing, or was. I mean, he's passed, of course. But even he thought that George was crazy, and often on his visits to Paris, he'd take whoever, he took me aside, but whoever was sort of the right-hand man of George at the time, he'd take us aside and just wonder how he managed to do it. Lawrence had to write that type of poetry he wrote, and to run City Lights Press like he did, he had such an organized mind.
Right.
Whereas George had a much more, as you said, chaotic view of life. Two very beautiful visions of what a bookstore can be.
I wanted to mention Ferlinghetti, well, because of the City Lights bookstore, but also because He died just a month ago, aged 101. And
isn't that remarkable?
George Whitman died in 2011, aged 98, from which I conclude that owning a bookshop is very good for longevity.
Don't you think?
Yes.
I mean, and also, I mean, I know there's so many, it's important to, retirement's great, but I sort of think, why, if you love what you do, why retire?
Yeah.
What both Lawrence and George had is they never wanted to retire. I mean, George died in his bookstore. Like, isn't that what we all want?
Yeah.
I know you're a photographer, an artist. You want to die with your camera in your hands, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
And that's I think that's longevity is passion. If you lose your passion, then it's a quick downhill.
Well, I think a lot of people, they find that when they retire, they it leaves a hole. And
oh, absolutely.
I mean, maybe while we're on the subject, that's the secret of life: find your passion. And
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So, how did that time for you at the bookshop at Shakespeare Company? How did it come to how did it end? Why did it end? How did it come to a close?
Well, I moved out to write more because, I mean, the irony of the bookstore and the paradox of the bookstore, if you will, as I said about George, is he was never able to really create himself. It was such a chaotic atmosphere that you can't create there. And the past 20 years of his life, he really wanted to recreate that atmosphere where great artists were coming to create in the bookstore, but you couldn't. So many people moving through, so many young people. So I wanted to write a book, and so I left the bookshop to write a book. Yeah.
Well, I think you wrote this book. Can we see it on the screen? Yeah.
I wrote a bad novel that I threw in the Seine, Alastair.
But what else would you do with a bad novel? You wrote a very good book called, which I just read, called "Time Was Soft There," about that time in the at the bookshop in Paris. And I said to you earlier on, I don't quite know what I was expecting when I picked it up, but it was certainly better than whatever I was expecting. I really enjoyed it, and
thank you so much.
It really is. I guess one of the reasons I enjoyed it was because I was kind of drilling down into Paris life myself at that time, and it sort of reflects some of that. But you took a more bohemian route than I was probably too afraid to. I lived in quite a nice apartment in that time, but so
you probably had options.
Fun to read.
You're smart enough to have options. I bet. It's.
And now George's daughter, as we saw in the little video clip, runs the bookstore, which is Sylvia, which is lovely. That continuity, and anybody watching, any of the viewers watching, finds themselves in Paris. I guess you would, and I certainly would highly recommend dropping in for a visit.
You still catch the original spirit.
Yeah.
I mean, what Sylvia's done is she saved the bookstore. It was impossible for it to continue as it was. As I said, I think the store had about 20 fire violations. It needed so much electrical work. And the city of Paris turned a blind eye on it as long as George was there. And it was her sense and sensibility that saved the store. And it's such a brilliant thing she did for the store. And she's also got a good business sense. You may have noticed she opened a bakery coffee shop beside it, which, it's just absolutely brilliant idea. Anything to keep the spirit alive, but you should definitely visit it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great place to visit. So the book, Time Was Soft There, you gave readings. You did a coast-to-coast book tour in the States with that book. How did that go down? Did the American public, what did they make of it?
It was one of the most sensational moments of my life. I had no papers. I was sans papier, and I was living in Marseille. And this hotel gave me a job in the black, working the night desk, right? From 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Because, you wouldn't get controlled at that time. And they would pay me like 50 euros a night. But every night I had their telephone, and I'd call independent bookstores in America. I'd say, hey, I've written a book about an independent bookstore. Can I come and give a reading? And every night I got a different bookstore to say yes. And at the end, I must have done what? I forget, but 35, 40 independent bookstores all across America. It was sensational. And it was so, oh my God. My publisher, I landed in New York, and St. Martin's, they took me into their audiobook room and said, take whatever you want. And they gave me literally like a bag like this of audiobooks back on CDs at the time. So I was driving all back and forth across America listening to audiobooks, and it was almost as almost as wonderful as the bookstore itself. Yeah.
But I did look up the route that you took on that tour, and to my surprise, you didn't read at City Lights.
I not. I was at
No.
City Lights.
You were in San Francisco, but unless there's a mistake somewhere, you're not down as having. You were in another different bookshop, and I thought
That's
kind
probably
of
true.
weird,
Probably
because that
true.
would be the obvious
yes!
place.
Oh, well, you don't know what happened, do you?
No, I don't.
Oh, God. Oh, well, this is going to get scandalous. Are you ready for some scandal, Alastair?
Okay, but keep it. Yeah, okay. Err on the side of caution, but yeah, go ahead.
So what happened is, as you know, I was an investigative crime journalist. So when I was at the bookstore, George's greatest regret in life is that he was estranged from his daughter, who at that point was 16 or 17 years old. George was an older man when he met the mother and married a woman who was 35 years his junior, and a woman who quite naturally did not want to raise perhaps her child in that chaotic environment. So the daughter was in London, and I went to find her and convince her to come back and try to rekindle the relationship with her father. And that's the basis of my book. And I was very proud of the book. I let George read it, and I let Sylvia read it beforehand, just to make sure, because it's their personal story. And it more or less passed muster. They were very happy with it. But then, sadly, Sylvia's mother read the book and was very upset because she wanted that chapter of her life to be kept private. And that unhappiness with the book by Sylvia's mother, which I understand completely, and I apologized to her. I'd never even thought of asking her because my story is with Sylvia and George, meant that I was persona non grata with the book at Shakespeare Company itself. And that extended to City Lights.
Okay, cool. That's good. All right, now you've got a little scoop there. That's good.
Yeah, there you go. So I've seen Sylvia at weddings, and it's always very cordial. And she really has a dear place in my heart because of what she's done. But I understand that writing about a person in such detail as I did could be hard for a family.
It seems like writing books gets you into trouble.
I'm a bit speechless because for some reason I've never made that
okay
myself.
Oh
my God, I'm going to have to see a therapist now, Alastair.
Jeremy, we've got some comments coming in here. Kathleen in Corvallis. Kathleen, hi. It's nice to know you're watching. She says a number of things. One of them were the books organized in the bookstore? Could the people working there find particular volumes if asked? That's a pretty good question, because it looks like that might not be the case. Was there a system?
There was a system. So there's two parts of the bookstore, and this is another interesting thing you should know. There's a downstairs part where books could be sold, and George was actually pretty smart about that. He had books about Paris and things in front, things that would sell well, and he had pretty good fiction. And the young people who worked at the cash were really good at things being organized. So all the books downstairs were for sale. And this is the crazy part. All the 30,000 books upstairs were not for sale. It was a free reading library.
Oh, wow.
So as you can imagine, I mean, it's not in harmony with the concept of a bookstore, right? Because often you'd say, well, why are you buying this? You can go upstairs and read it for free. And so that's where the chaos set in. Like, you could generally find things downstairs, but upstairs it was really through the looking glass. No idea what you'd find. Volumes from the 19th century, 20th century. It was just a stunning mix and melange of books.
Well, Kathleen also says, what year exactly did Jeremy live in the store? That was what? You were there from 2000 to 2000?
It was 2000, and then we ran the literary magazine or the store until 2003. Yeah.
Okay. Nancy Thompson, hi Nancy, asks, was there a cat in the bookstore?
Oh, yes.
Like it's on the cover. There was?
Yes. And there was constant fights between George and the young women who worked at the bookstore, because they wanted to feed the cat. And George felt that the cat should not be fed to keep it hungry for the mice.
That's reasonable.
Yeah.
Kathleen again says, what? No, we had that. We got a few people saying that quote I gave from Bob Dylan is a mistake. You're right. Janis Joplin lyric.
Why?
Me and Bobby McGee. And Thomas in New York says it was Chris Christopherson wrote Me and Bobby McGee, sung by Janis Joplin. Thank you, Thomas.
Chris Christopherson, really?
I didn't know that. I stand corrected. We both stand corrected. Yeah, that's great. Okay, Shelton. Hi, Shelton in Silver Spring asks or says, if time is the greatest luxury, how has your experience with that luxury changed over the years? Whoa. That's quite a question. If time is the greatest luxury, how has your experience with that luxury changed over the years? I guess because with life, you know, how we quantify time changes. How do you measure time?
What it is, it's become this incredible balancing act where I just, like, for example, I've cut out so much of my life, like ridiculous, you know, we try not to watch television, all these things. I get up very early so I can still do the things I love. So I'm a volunteer football coach, for example, which takes 15, 20 hours a week. And that's a luxury, right? For me, that's the greatest luxury, to be able to be a volunteer. I write these, I do a lot of artistic translation, which doesn't pay. And that's a luxury. So sadly, to enjoy the luxury of time, I've had to micromanage my life and my income. And what I do is I earn a full-time living in 15 to 20 hours a week, 15 to 20 hours a week. So the idea is that in 15 or 20 hours a week, I can earn enough to pay my share of the mortgage, pay my share of the car payment, pay the food. And the other rests my free time to write, to be a volunteer. But the crushing reality is, and for those of you out there who have children, you know, I don't mind being poor. I don't mind wearing crappy clothes. I don't mind taking a long swim when I'm 88 because I don't have a pension, you know? But I want the very best for my children. So now this idea of luxury of time is, how do I spend time with my children, spend time with my passion, and also provide a future for my children? And that, sir, if you have an answer, I'm open to listening to it.
That's nicely put, Jeremy. Lila in Franklin, North Carolina says, are you still in touch with the shop owner and others that you met during your 4 months at Shakespeare? I'm
in touch with a lot of people. I was part of a group from Shakespeare Company that opened what I consider the most beautiful bookstore in the world in Ia, Atlantis Books. They went down there inspired by the shop. I was able to give them a great boost. I did an article in The Guardian naming the top bookstores in the world, and I named theirs as the top bookstore in the world, and that helped them when they were early.
Wow.
So I'm very much in touch with Atlantis Books in Greece. And if Viking goes to Greece, if Viking goes to Ia, you must visit this bookstore. It's looking over the caldera. It's the most, hands down, the most beautiful bookstore in the world. So I'm in touch with them. I sometimes cross Sylvia at, as I said, at a wedding or events like that. We still have friends in common, and it's cordial, nothing more. But other than that, my friends have shifted into two categories. And I wonder if this happened in your life, Alastair. But I've got such deep, deep friends from Shakespeare Company who I've managed to keep ties with, and we have this bond that's unbreakable. And then a lot of the people I loved at that time were going off the rails, and I didn't see it. And like, I don't want to be depressing, but 20 years later, 3 or 4 people who I lived with at the bookstore have committed suicide. There's alcoholism, drug problems. And you sort of realize, like, that was all part. If you're going to create a refuge for people, for artistically minded people who need to escape the world, they're all not going to be success stories. And what you've done is you've given them a haven where they feel good about themselves for a short period of time. And it's such a gift. But many other people will sadly fall by the wayside. And it's another hard lesson of life, right? Often the people who are a little bit different, they're the ones who are at Shakespeare Company, and they have a hard time sometimes.
Yeah, well, I agree with a lot of that. I mean, I think choosing a path of pure creativity is I would never include myself in that. But writing, painting, music, or whatever is it's a tough road to walk. You know, and not everybody makes it on the way, because you're living with it. I mean, to be honest, I think writing, it's something I would never want to be a writer. I mean, I just wouldn't. It's got to be. It must be one of the toughest jobs going. I think. I think it was Mary Shelley called it writing the stinking workbench of creation. You know, and that's what it is. It's a smelly old workbench, and you just got to nail yourself to it. And it's a lonely. It's also very lonely. I think.
It's a tremendously lonely, and also we have a mutual friend who's a great writer and has been a mentor to me, Sparkle Hayter. She's written wonderful crime novels, and she organized a book launch for me at the Chelsea Hotel. Just a wonderful woman, and she was on tour with a very successful writer, Harlan Coben, I think his name is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I
heard. He was trying to help her, and he said to her, "Look, Sparkle, you're so talented. Every time you do a reading, you need to go into that room and convince the audience that if they buy one book this year, they buy your book." And Sparkle was devastated by this advice because it basically stopped her from writing, because she said, wait a second, they should probably buy Dostoevsky or maybe, Alice Munro or maybe. And so it just caused this great internal questioning. And Harlan was right. To succeed, you need to kind of have a vision like that, because otherwise you can be destroyed by self-doubt and wondering if your voice needs to be heard.
Yeah. Yep, it's not easy. Jeremy, you now live way down in the south of France, in a region called the Luberon.
Oh yes,
which is an area that I know quite well. It's an extremely beautiful area in Provence, with lots of pretty little villages cascading down the sides of hills. What was it that took you down there?
Well, I followed a woman to Marseille, which not a surprise, and that didn't work out, but I fell in love with Marseille. Marseille is my favorite city in the world. And what happened is, going back to the reality of time and money, we wanted to buy a house, and we were stone cold broke in Marseille, and we could have bought maybe a 1-bedroom apartment, So we found an old mining village in the Luberon, where we could buy a 2 hectare house for the same price as a 2-bedroom in Marseille. And listen to this. It's near me is the world's biggest science experiment called ITER, which is a $25 billion international fusion project. Mm-hmm. So for this project, they've built an international school with 7 different languages, like there's Italian, French, German, French, Spanish, French, English, French. So that's how we ended up here in the Luberon. My kids can go to the school with all the nuclear scientist children, and I can sit in my little hut and translate artists and not worry about getting paid.
Because your village is Saint-Meme.
Saint-Meme, yeah.
Yeah. What kind of, just give us a little portrait of Saint-Meme. We can see on the map where it is.
So Saint-Meme was an old mining village.
Yeah.
We are very proud to have the most deadly mine in France. And this is just in the terms of the number of deaths per miners. Because there's only ever about 100 miners working there, but 1 would die per year. All working class. We were a communist village for about 60, 70 years. And today we're about 900 people. And it's just a fantastic place to live. Fantastic place to live. Yeah, that's my village. I work with the football team in Dauphin, which is on and it's one of the most beautiful villages in France. But it's more, they were the mine owners, and I live with the miners. So
I love that. Well, that's good you raised that topic, because I wanted to get onto that. Because you are, like me, an outsider, an étranger. And I was going to ask you how integrated you feel, or whether you even want to be integrated. Because one of the things I really like about the state of expatria is that sense of being on the outside looking in, of being amongst the people, but not of the people. That might just be more to do with me. I mean, I guess you have children. You just said you were very involved with the football team. Not being integrated is not really a choice for you, is it? You have to be you're part of a community, very much part of a local community.
I don't know if you felt this at all, Alastair, but I really feel I have the best of both worlds. Like, I subscribe to the Superman theory. Like, Superman on his home planet was nothing, right? He was just a regular dude. He comes down to Earth, he has these superpowers. And I don't know if you've noticed this in your travels, is that when you go to new environments, suddenly you're seen as different. Suddenly, like in my village, je suis le Canadien, right? Like, I'm like the guy. And so I love that ability to integrate into the community as the other, right? So I coach football, I was a volunteer in the school, I was president of the social committee in town, in the village, but I'm always the Canadian. And everything I see, everything I do is kind of a bit special just because I have a very naive, a very optimistic attitude. I'm the first to admit it. The worst war in Canadian history, we had, 110 people dead on the plains of Abraham. I mean, France has seen just horror after horror, 2 world wars, the Algerian, after the Algerian war. So there's a reason for this cynicism about life, or this pessimism. But I float above it. Like, they all say I come from the pays de bisounours. Do you know the bisounours?
No.
And the Care Bears.
The what?
Is it the Care Bears, the bisounours?
Okay, yeah, I get it. Yeah. Okay,
so,
the Care Bears, yeah.
So I love it. I'm like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, buddy.
Well, that's the kind of what I was talking about. Yeah, I mean, I some people can't handle that. I think it's a particular kind of person who is able to completely live their lives in a country far away from where they came. Not everybody can do it. Some people do it for a while and then they go back home. Some people create little islands where they don't learn the language and they just stick amongst some people from their own country, and they always eat the same food as they always used to eat, and watch get their satellite TV programs. And then normally end up going back as well. You and I have been slightly different in that way.
That is true.
What would be your if I asked you, Jeremy, what are your top tips for someone who is maybe considering leaving their homeland and wanting to begin a new life in a foreign country?
Well, I mean, my top tips would be just to do it, right? To go and to don't live with other strangers, Yeah. I send some of my students to London all the time, and I menace them. I threaten them. I say, do not live with other French people.
Yeah.
Don't do it. Get a bad job, get a crap job, and have kids. Because then you're in the French schools, and then you get to know people, But the one thing I'd say is just do it. Just go and leave and try. Life is so short, and I've gone bust 3 or 4 times financially. I've had to give up all my books 3 separate times.
Ooh,
and look, I'm still here today. Like, look, I don't know if I can see my bookshelf there.
Yeah,
I've got books again, right? I'm back. I'm back. So don't be afraid of losing everything.
I think also
have is regrets,
I think keeping a sense of humor helps a lot, because you're going to get laughed. I mean, especially at the beginning, people just laugh at me, especially my attempts to speak French, which has got a lot better since. But you need a sense of humor and to not make comparisons. Some people I noticed, it's not like this where I come from, and and I don't understand this. You do this differently. You just got to go with it. Just go with it.
You're absolutely right.
I like to see
and to avoid the expatriate community. Because of the science experiment here, you get these people, and it's almost like for 3 years they don't meet any French people, and you've got to find ways, right? Whether it's through sport or art or acting or cooking or a job, you need to just turn your back. And if you walk into a bar and hear an English speaker, walk the hell out.
Absolutely, but it is fantastically liberating, I think.
Oh my God, yes. You reinvent yourself as who you want to be. Like, you're not burdened down by all the things you absorbed growing up, and also mistakes or not, but you can actually live the truest version of yourself. Yeah, and it's very. I think when I said liberating, I think it frees you up from
from having to identify with one particular culture and all that goes with that. I don't really feel I belong to any particular nation. I told you earlier, I have great trouble in sporting matches knowing who to support. You know, because I don't really care who wins. I just want to watch a good game.
Absolutely.
And that's, in a way, is a kind of freeing thing, I think, to be. You become a kind of world person in a way, I think, as opposed to someone who comes from one particular place and one particular identity.
Oh, absolutely.
Anyway,
yeah.
I mentioned.
I wonder how you felt about how you've lived all these experiences, really, like from Brexit to the pandemic that has really cut your ties to your native country. All that must have really tested your sense of who you are. Yeah, well, in a way that you don't know, but which is actually you're right on the money. Is that I found out by complete chance my father was born in Ireland. Really?
And thank you, Ireland, gives me the right to Irish nationality, which I applied for immediately. And one day, an Irish passport dropped in my mailbox.
Are you serious?
I tell you, I held it, and my hands were almost shaking because, you know, you're talking about identity, and suddenly, well, now I'm an Irish citizen. And I mean, I have been to Ireland; it's a lovely country. I'd be happy to live there. But that was my way of dealing with Brexit anyway.
Interesting.
But enough about me, Jeremy. I've got to talk about you. Because I mentioned earlier that some of your work you do is translating work.
Yes.
And I was particularly delighted to see on your website that you translate the books by one of my very favorite photographers, a member of the Magnum Photo Agency. His name is Antoine D'Agata. And he took, as far as I'm concerned, the best images I've seen taken during this time of pandemic. And he used a very specific technique to do it. Could you just tell us something about that technique? Because you translated the book. You probably know more about it.
I mean, it's a fascinating book. First of all, so his work was done with thermal imaging, as you can see on the screen. And he's a renowned first-person photographer, which is to say, I mean, he puts himself in situations, often a bit risque, as you know, and if viewers out there are going to look at his work, you should know it can be disturbing. I work with one of my proofreaders refuses to work with me on Antoine's projects because she finds it so troubling, some of the content. What attracts me about him as an artist is that I sort of feel in our human existence, we're born with this animal side that we spend our whole life trying to crush down, you know, these instincts to try to be tame ourselves and try to create this livable space that society lets us. And he just throws it aside and really looks into what it means to be human. And I find that fascinating. And so for this book, I don't know how you handled the lockdowns, but he got some of the greatest writers in France and in America to discuss the notion of how the lockdown affects, you know, the human condition. And it was fascinating. And as many artists, you probably know this, he's so generous. He's generous to a fault. I mean, he sold his own prints at ridiculous prices just to pay the writers to do his book. He's a true artist in that sense of the word. And I really, really think he should be more well known, with the caveat that he can do work in difficult areas.
Well, he really walks the walk. I mean those pictures. James, could you put up the guy on the escalator picture from Antoine D'Agata? This picture in particular, for me, this was the picture for me which weirdly just summed up the whole of what I've been living in the last year. There's something incredibly lonely about that picture, on an escalator going nowhere. You know,
it just screams solitude, huh?
And what I love about it has the feel of a painting. It looks a bit like an Edvard Munch painting in a way.
You're absolutely right.
It doesn't look like
absolutely right.
And it has something, the way that the head of that individual is bowed.
Absolutely.
And that hand is sort of rather sadly placed on the moving escalator. I just thought, and you know, using that technique is just worked really well. I thought they were great pictures.
And it sort of talks about, going back to what we were talking about this idea of freedom or throwing yourself into new situations, and what keeps us from doing that, and fear. The reason he got those photographs is when Paris was locked down, he just refused to accept it. And he was going into hospitals, you know, where coronavirus plagued hospitals and taking photographs. He was just saying, my health, you know, my calling is more important than any concerns I have about my health at this point. And a great art resulted from it. And I'm really, you've actually made me feel really proud to have collaborated on that book with him, to hear the way.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, yeah. And I'd love to, you know, talk to you more about it another time. But let's talk about one of your books that I'm reading right now. I haven't finished it yet. It's this book. We have a still, I think we can put up of it. It's called When the Guillotine Fell. And it's a great idea. Well, first, why don't you just give us a little brief description of what it's about and how you came to this story, this idea. Where did this idea come from to write this book?
Oh, absolutely. So I came from a crime writing background, true crime. You know, I loved books like David Simon's Homicide, you know, which is a journalistic approach to true crime. Mm-hmm. But also come from Shakespeare Company, where I really started to understand, you know, the beauty of ideas and the profound knowledge you need to understand them. So I said, what if you could, you know, mix the two? What if you could mix true crime and the philosophy of the death penalty? And so that's what I tried to do by tracing the history of the philosophy of the death penalty. Like, when do we have the right to take a life? Dating back to the ancient Greeks, even prior to that, Hammurabi's Code. And mixing it with just a really grotesque murder case where a nobody, an angry young man, viciously killed a woman in Marseille and dumped her body among the olive trees. And I said, we're going to mix these two things, like an intellectual analysis of the death penalty with a shocking true crime. And you are very unique to have liked that book, because most people like them separate, you know. It's kind of like one of those like peanut butter and pickle sandwiches, you know. People who love them, but most people don't want to touch it.
No, it's I find it hard to put down, because the story of the I mean, it is a particularly gruesome murder, a true life murder that happened in the early 1970s of a young Tunisian guy who brutally murdered this French girl. And we follow his story and his life and her story and her life and the backstory of the death penalty and the guillotine. Because what a lot of people might not know is that the guillotine was still legal in France until 1981.
1981. That's exactly what gave me. Someone told me, I was visiting the prison, and they said, "Oh yeah, this is where he got guillotined." I'm like, "When, in 1870?" No, 1977.
1970s. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, and he was the last man to be
the last man to be guillotined. Exactly. Yes. Which, ironically, I mean, many people are now arguing is the most humane way to kill someone. If you believe that a person should be put to death for their crimes, it's way better than lethal injection. And forget the electric chair. My God.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, I think that was part of the origin of the guillotine, that it was democratic.
Absolutely.
During the time of the French Revolution, it was a rather seen as being quite a sort of.
Do you have this might not be the place to ask the question, but do you have a position on the death? Do you think humans have the right to take the life of other humans?
No, I'm a complete. I mean, I'm not ashamed of it. I'm totally against the death penalty on a number of levels, and we won't go too deeply into this, but there is absolutely no proof that it does not act as a deterrent.
It's so expensive. It's not dissuasive.
That's. I mean, on that reason alone, you should. The other reason is that quite a lot of people end up on death row by mistake.
Absolutely.
It turns out that their trial was that there were errors in the process or whatever.
Absolutely.
That's another good reason. And then there's the moral argument, which is the absurdity of saying, well, you mustn't murder people.
So we'll murder you
by killing you. Yeah.
Well, precisely.
I mean, I think I think I'm right on saying this, that in the United States, if you are found guilty of murder, but you are mentally not sane, in inverted commas, you will then follow a course of therapy in order to become sane enough to be executed.
Absolutely.
Which is to me is a complete anathema. But those are my own personal thoughts on the matter anyway. But I think,
I agree completely with you. And what I find interesting is, I mean, I believe that if we're going to create the city on the hill, this moral, what we all want to do, we're all striving for some type of, peaceful, serene greatness. And I love that argument. But you know what I tell people in Texas? Is that they're just soft. They're just soft. You really want that guy to suffer? Leave him in jail. You know? Let him think about his crimes for 30, 35 years. And that, let me tell you, that's far more persuasive than me babbling on about the morality and Jesus and this and that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Jeremy, we're nearing the end of our time.
Oh, no.
It's flashed by, but there's quite a lot of questions have been sent in. Is it okay if I...
Please, let's go, yes.
If I hit you with them?
Go, that's a speed round.
Well, there's an observation I get from Leticia, who says very insightful information. Wesley in the US, hi Wesley, says, how did you first hear about Shakespeare and Company?
I didn't know it existed. I was literally walking, feeling like an idiot, having spent my day's budget on that stupid Ferris wheel to try to impress a woman. And I was like, and I found the used books. And I was like, oh, this will give me 3 days of entertainment with my last spare francs. And it was unbelievable. It was an unbelievable coincidence, yeah.
Okay, Gio, forgive me if I pronounce that wrong, in Grinnell, can you share a few of your favorite authors? How about a few of your favorite books? What do you got?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm a huge Alice Munro fan as a Canadian. Okay. I grew up loving Mordecai Richler. And as an adult, it's very hard for me to compare anyone to David Foster Wallace, who I think is, I've read all his books. I even read his unfinished book about the IRS, and he's probably my favorite living author. Well, no, he's not living.
Do you read him?
Contemporary, I guess. I mean, he again, referring back to what you said earlier about the creative life. I mean, that's, for me, one of the great tragedies of the 21st century is his death.
Yeah. Do you read in French?
Because I translate in French, I tend not to read in French unless it's a French book, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No.
Like, I would never, I'm reading, you know what I'm reading right now is that crazy book by Georges Perec, The Absence. Did you read that?
No, but I've heard of it. I know what you're talking about. Yeah. George Perec. Okay.
And it's for your viewers who don't know it. He's written a whole book without the letter E. Okay. And it starts out as you think, oh, he's just showing off as a writer to try to not use the E. But then it's actually a crime story about finding out what happened to the E. And it's, yeah.
Great.
It's crazy.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. Eileen in Messuen asks, hi Eileen, are you a French citizen? If not, are you planning to become one?
I'm not a French citizen. However, I now qualify, I can request it. So I'm going to probably request my French citizenship to pursue one of two goals. To work at the top secret international nuclear facility. I need my French citizenship because then I'd get to hang out with the nuclear scientists.
Right.
Or to run for European Parliament so I can shake some sense into these French people about deposits on tin cans. I think every can of Coca-Cola should have a 5-cent deposit on it. Every bottle of wine should have a 25-cent deposit on it. So I want to run for European Parliament on one issue, recycling via deposits on cans and bottles.
Hey, good for you. You become a recycling warrior. You know?
I think it's so logical. And you know who screwed us? Les Grands Surfaces, the Carrefours, the Auchan, the Hotel. They didn't want to deal with it. We had the deposits in France. Anyway, I'm sorry if I'm bothering you, but God bless America for its deposit system on cans and bottles.
Absolutely. Thomas, again in New York. Hi, Thomas, says, such a great interview. I definitely will read his book and pass it on to family and friends. We are avid book readers and bookstore lovers. Merci beaucoup. Thomas, well, on Viking.TV, we love books and we love writers and we love people who read. So you're in good company. Scott in Grapevine in the US says in the 80s and 90s, we had an eclectic bookstore in Fort Worth. when it closed, part of the city died. Yeah, I couldn't. I mean, I personally pretty much grew up in bookstores because my father was always hanging out in them. And yeah, it's I don't want to live in a world without bookstores. Put it that way.
Do you have a bookstore near you where you can go with English books?
Yeah, I go. I go to one on the Rue de Rivoli in Paris. Not Smith's, the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so you go to Paris for your books?
Yeah, I do. And this bookstore is particularly, it has lovely wooden ladders with varnished, wood, and there's a lot of brass, and it's a gorgeous place to hang out. I can spend hours in there.
Oh, that's wonderful. If your viewers are ever in Aix-en-Provence, I go to the Book and Bar, which is run by this dynamic young French woman. It's got excellent selection of English books and good literary events, and it's holding on in the face of Amazon. So,
I think, certainly in the UK, independent bookstores they're doing okay. I mean, they've dipped down, and it's in the same way. Do you remember when we said video will be the death of cinema? And
yes.
No, people still want to go to the cinema, and people will still want to go and buy books. I'm convinced of that.
And they need that third space, a place where they feel comfortable, where they can talk with you. And that's why I think, actually, some people say, we're upset about the entry of like the coffee bar in the bookshelf in the bookstore, but I think having a table or two with a few coffees is perfect, because it's a great place. I mean, you meet someone in a bookstore, you sit down and have a coffee. Like, that's a perfect afternoon, no?
I couldn't agree more. Susan says, have you ever done a book tour in Canada?
I did Toronto. Well, I did a book tour for my first book in Canada, and I was on. It was quite successful, so I was on a lot of daytime television shows, which was exciting. And then because I had to leave the country days after my second book was published, I didn't get to do the book.
Oh, I see. Well, yeah.
I stood up a few bookstores on that because of that. Yeah.
Noel in the US says, I definitely saw you at the bookstore.
Shut up.
Where did you shower if there was no bathroom? Any recommendations for the budding writer? Thank you.
There's two things. So did you know about the public showers in Paris?
Yeah, I did. I never used them, I never had to, but I knew that they existed.
They're awful. The closest ones to us were at the Pompidou Center, which is underneath the Pompidou Center. There was a public showers, and at the time you paid 10 francs, and you could stay for an hour, so that's about $1, and you could shave, warm water, and everyone brought forks with them because you'd have to stick the fork. Because they had these water, the water would stop, so you'd stick the fork in, so you could get a steady stream of lukewarm water, and you used 59 minutes and 59 seconds of your hour on your one visit a week to the public showers. And the other option, of course, was girlfriends or boyfriends. That's
yeah. Have you got a top tip for a budding writer?
Yes. Two things. One, stop writing. I have so many friends who've been writing the same book for 10 years. So you got to stop. Okay. Wow. And two, have the strength to edit it. None of the books I've published and none of the translations I've published have ever had less than 4 edits. So that's 4 different manuscripts. And it's that process. After a few beers or a bottle of rosé, we all think we're geniuses, but you need to be able to look at your manuscript in the light of day and work it. As you said, who did you quote when you're talking about the writer's bench and the dour, lonely work?
I think it's Mary Shelley.
Exactly. I mean, it's so lonely. And because so many geniuses have written, you're in constant self-doubt. So you just have to work and work. And if you become that worker, you'll get published. I guarantee you.
I tell you, I just thought of a little tip that I'd like to give to budding writers. That is open mind, open heart, feet on the ground.
Feet on the ground.
Feet on the ground. Well,
absolutely.
Otherwise, you fly away. Otherwise,
absolutely.
So you need somewhere. You need to be grounded somewhere. I think that's in my opinion. But with
it works for a lot of people. I don't know if you ever did this in your creative pursuits, but when you work with other writers and sometimes you read chapters with them. I hate this because I'm so self-conscious, but I've got many writer friends who the act of reading their chapter in front of other writers who are of course supportive does wonders for their work.
Yeah, absolutely. What have we got here? Richard in Pompton Plains says, fascinating to listen to both of you talk. I feel like a very present observer and wishing the three of us could continue to talk together for hours. Oh, isn't that nice?
Wonderful.
Thank you, Richard. That's really sweet. I wish we could, well, maybe, one day, in not too distant future, we will be able to travel and talk together. Kathleen, again, says, I find it harder when living overseas, 12 countries so far, in brackets, to get away from the place's notion of who I am than from my ideas of who I am.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. The US is so ever-present everywhere. Maybe it's easier to get away from being Canadian in everyone's eyes. That's an interesting comment, actually. I can see that, American culture in particular being so dominant.
Absolutely.
It's a kind of label stuck to your forehead.
Absolutely. That's a fascinating observation,
Yeah. Dan says, excellent talk, entertaining and educational. Good for you guys for putting it off. Thank you, Dan. Okay, last question here, because we got to let you go, Jeremy. From Noel, how's your French?
Franchement, c'est pas mal. C'est pas mal du tout. But this is the secret. Okay, you'll know this, Alastair. But there's this rock and roll star in America and in France called Serge Gainsbourg.
Yeah, sure.
And his girlfriend, Jane
Birkin.
Jane Birkin made her legend in France with her butchered French. Elle a toujours un petit accent, and it was mignon, it was cute. So I am the Jane Birkin of the south of France.
That's lovely. I love that. I think that's a great note to end on. Jeremy, you've been a star tonight, and I've loved chatting with you. I feel we could go on for another hour, but we've got to let James go, and I need to go and get a glass of wine. So
absolutely,
thank you so
deserve
much.
it.
Thank you so much for being with us this evening and for being so entertaining and insightful. And bon, je te souhaite bien et merci et bonsoir.
Merci beaucoup, Alastair.